Uh, oh my god. You're not gonna be able to convince me that peanut butter and jelly belongs on a sandwich. Jelly is gross. That is gross. I do not like jelly.
Good thing. We think of charity as an always good thing, but that just isn't always the case. Generosity is a wonderful trait in a person and in societies. Yet time after time, giving morphs into something that hurts people. Sometimes that's on a national scale. Haiti is the most screwed up society in the Western Hemisphere, yet it has over 10,000 charitable organizations running the most basic services. They outspend the Haitian government by a 3-to-1 margin, and yet those charities have helped keep it a failed state. We've also seen it on a personal level.
Dodo donate $2. Let me see. Here we go.
When I ran for mayor, I said I was going to tax the rich. Well, today, we're taxing the rich. I'm thrilled to announce we've secured a pied-à-terre tax, the first in New York's history. This is an annual fee on luxury properties worth more than $5 million, whose owners do not live full-time in the city. Like for this penthouse, which hedge fund CEO Ken Griffin bought for $238 million. This pied-à-terre tax is specifically designed for the richest of the rich, those who store their wealth in New York City real estate, but who don't actually live here. But even so, they're able to reap the huge financial rewards of owning property in, dare I say, the greatest city in the world. And most of the time, these units are sitting empty, since again, they don't actually live here.
New York ain't the greatest city in the world. Really never has been, if you ask me. But yeah, especially with this guy running it, fuck no. I really don't know if this is going to end up making a difference. Probably won't. They might get an extra few peanuts from this weird tax.
This is a fundamentally unfair system that hurts working New Yorkers. Now, it's coming to an end. This tax will raise at least $500 million directly for the city. It'll help fund things.
Yeah, you say that. This guy is spending $70 million opening up 3 grocery stores. Like, that 500 million is going to run out pretty fucking quick with the way that that guy spends it.
Things like free childcare, cleaner streets, and safer neighborhoods. As mayor,
the neighborhoods are already less safe. This guy's letting out all the fucking criminals.
I believe everyone has a role to play in contributing to our city, and some a little bit more than others. Happy Tax Day, New York.
Somebody needs to deport that guy.
This tiny bit of land has one of the biggest crude oil deposits in the world, over 1 trillion barrels. But not all oil is created equal. And the stuff here is pretty much the absolute worst. Lighter oils are much easier to get out of the ground, refine, and the stuff you get out of them is more valuable. Heavier oils are a different story. You need to inject steam next to the reservoir, or mix in lighter oils just to liquefy it enough to pump out. Then it needs extra processing before it can be refined. And the stuff you get out of heavy oil is usually much less valuable: asphalt, tar, and shipping fuel. But the oil in the Orinoco Belt is next level. It's way over here on the extra heavy side of the spectrum. It's also particularly bad in another way. Getting it out produces heaps of methane, a greenhouse gas that's 80 times worse than CO2. That makes Venezuela's oil
the highest emitting barrel for the lowest price on the market.
This tiny
That's great. Who fucking cares? These people have kids they can't afford, then complain and demand Mamdani rent freeze.
A new report now shows that 62% of New Yorkers truly cannot afford to live in the city they call home. So we pressed Mayor Zohran Mamdani about what he's doing to fix this disparity, which is particularly bad, he says, in black and brown neighborhoods, and what he's doing to bring good-paying jobs to the city.
It's bad in black and brown neighborhoods because black and brown people make less money.
3 kids in the city at this point is really hard.
Aisha Washington says she's just scraping to get by.
Yeah, tell me, how many of those kids are from one father? Huh? Yeah. You want to bet it's one? So, like, these same people who are talking about, oh, it's hard to get by, it's so unaffordable. She probably had these kids when she was, like, fucking 17, and then there's, like, 3 different fucking fathers for 3 kids.
Between the cost of food, rising rent, and after-school activities for the kids.
Right now I work 2 places, but I'm looking for another job just to help me accommodate all 3 of my children.
Now Mayor Zohran Mamdani says he has hard...
Oh, notice how she doesn't say, and their father is like this and that. No, Dad. Wonder why. So, yeah, funny. The person asking for the rent freeze is some fucking idiot who had 3 kids, absent fucking fathers. Probably, literally, all those kids are from fucking different men. And then, can you read my rent? I think your fucking problem is you need to make better life choices, not fucking rent freeze.
Data to back up what too many New Yorkers like Washington feel. At an event at Medgar Evers College, he released 2 related reports. 1, a citywide racial equity plan, and 2, a, quote, true cost of living measure. The report shows that it costs $159,197 for the median family with children to afford the city. The report also showed that a slight majority of white families are getting by with those numbers, but large majority of black, Hispanic, and AAPI families are not.
It inspires us to redouble our commitments in 2 ways. One is to ensure that as many...
His policies are already driving up rent prices. So since this fuckwit got elected, it's just gotten more expensive. Just wait and see. Everything's going to get more expensive. This guy's going to annihilate all these other businesses too.
New Yorkers in this city as possible can earn a living wage so that they can actually keep up with the cost of living in the city. And 2 is to tackle the costs that are pushing that cost.
Buddy, it's hilarious. He's talking about letting people earn a livable wage. They're imposing some like bizarre fucking regulations for Amazon where they can't subcontract delivery people. So chances are what's going to happen is thousands of fucking people are going to lose their fucking jobs because of idiots like this in New York City.
Cost of living so high.
The mayor says that explains his focus on universal childcare and housing, 2 of the biggest reasons the city is so expensive. But with job growth in the city largely flat over the last year, we pressed him repeatedly about what he's doing to get people that living wage. What are you doing to bring jobs to the city right now?
We are looking to continue to grow not just jobs, but also industry in this city, and to ensure that that growth reaches every single New Yorker. We're seeing commitments, whether it be from Bank of America or American Express or so many other large-scale companies, to not just the present of this city, but also the future of this city. And that's work that we will continue to do.
Of course, all of this discussion about affordability and jobs comes against the backdrop of state lawmakers considering raising taxes.
They're just, like, again, none of these policies work. They've been doing this for how long? The fucking rent freeze stuff, the rent-regulated apartments, it's only gone up. So, like, when is anybody going to figure out, oh, this is a dumb fucking idea?
I'm so disappointed. The Senate had a chance today to send a strong message to Donald Trump to say, stop the war in Iran, make the ceasefire permanent. And instead, the War Powers Resolution failed by a vote of 52 to 47. All the Democrats voted for it except stupid.
You know, I noticed those stairs in your dumb bitch house are really steep. Why don't you fall down those stairs? That's a really good staircase for her. I like how steep it is. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
How long do you sleep each night? Recently I keep waking up at 3 a.m. Do you take melatonin?
Yeah, I just started taking melatonin. I find 20 milligrams helps. And growth hormone sure as fuck helps you sleep. That's been great for my sleep. Thanks for the donation, Wolfdean. I sleep about 8 hours. Dodo donates no VG, spent 30 million opening the first grocery store, so it must cost 150 million for all also react. Oh, yeah. 30 million. Like, dude, how in the fuck could it have possibly cost 30 million? It just doesn't make any, like, it, you know, stuff like this has been happening in Canada too, where liberals have had like weird conflicts of interest with these big infrastructure projects. So it's just what lefties do. Netanyahu, did the Nazis ask the Jews to leave politely? Did they say please leave? Of course not. Yes, the Havara Agreement facilitated the emigration of German Jews to Palestine. 60k Jews chose. Is this guy like nuts?
What, did the Nazis ask the Jews to leave, kindly leave, go out? Did others, you want me to name all the genocidal leaders of history? Just go one by one. Did anyone do this? Did they say, get out?
How in the fuck, like, who the hell are these people? Is this a fucking bot account? Those are some of the most bizarre fucking replies I've ever seen to something like that.
And self-identify as someone who would be taxed by this proposal. They said, you know, I'm a millionaire, and is it true that you want to raise taxes on me? And I said, it is true. And they said, well, I would leave. I said, I don't think you would. They said, why not? I said, because we're looking to raise income taxes on the top 1% by 2%. So for $1 million a year, that's an increase.
Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, this guy is not going to generate any net income for the city. I didn't know that. Let me see.
It's a small piece of Ukraine right in the middle of Brazil. We're talking about Prudentópolis, a Brazilian municipality in the state of Paraná, where approximately 80% of the population is descended from Ukrainian immigrants. Ukrainian immigrants began arriving in Brazil in the late 19th century, with most coming from Galicia, now in today's Poland and Ukraine.
I didn't know that either, but I don't really care. Thanks for the donation, dude. Balls, moose, 20 tillers, holy shit, new Mangus, it's not AI. Oh yeah, I saw that earlier today. Yeah, it's pretty weird Mangus. Never seen that kind of Mangus. That's a palace cat. They're very round. is you when you're dieting, but C, stir-fried tofu. She's got a broccoli. That's good. Thanks for the donation, dude.
It's so strange how South America, the country with the most deforestation, also ironically has the most oil.
They probably also have the most amount of big booty bitches, too. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
Also,
hundreds of supporters of the Lebanese political military group Hezbollah gathered outside the Lebanese Prime Minister's office on Friday to protest direct talks between the Lebanese government and Israel scheduled for next week. Today I support what is right, and what is right indicates that these negotiations are dangerous, the protester said. We are being massacred. We are dying. Our land is being destroyed. This is genocide. Attacks between Israel and Hezbollah intensified on Friday. At least 13 members of Lebanon's security forces were killed in an Israeli strike in the south.
Why does this sound like some bullshit AI? I don't know who the fuck in Lebanon supports Hezbollah, but the entire government wants them to get the fuck out. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
hopefully one of these days that worthless old hag falls down those stairs and dies.
Yeah, we can only hope. Thanks for the donation, Dodo. Dodo donated $2, intersectional feminism.
I'm Olivia. I am with Code Pink. Code Pink started when the U.S. invaded Iraq over 20 years ago. George Bush said...
Yeah, this is a Chinese, like, fucking psyop, basically. China didn't like the U.S. invading Iraq.
Code Red. And we said, Code Pink, for a feminist foreign policy that prioritizes people and the planet, not war criminals and making a killing off of killing, which...
Hopefully, Israel bombs one of their fucking rallies. Fuck's sakes.
Today, going around to the gas stations and talking to people filling up their tanks. And boy, they are mad at hell. I mean, look at the prices. $5.39 for regular, $6 for premium. Well,
isn't her husband literally a fucking billionaire?
$5.999. And that's why I've been busy putting these stickers on here. These stickers that say, I did that. Let's give Trump credit for what he did, which is make these gas prices unaffordable for working Americans. Now,
Oh boy. If I owned a gas station and I saw that dumb bitch putting stickers all over the place, fuck me. Flip a lid. This is genocide. Watch Israel destroy a town, Al-Kham, southern Lebanon. Okay, there's a few issues I have with this. One, I noticed this is all in Arabic, so that makes me question if, like, any of these photos are even remotely real. Two, I can't, like, there's a different contrast. Like, this is likely filmed at a different time of day and everything. I don't know how much of this is actually destroyed or not. Because, like, if this was taken, like, say, during... Like, even the grass looks different and shit. I don't know if this was taken during a rainy season versus a dry season. Like, if you look here, I genuinely can't tell, like, if anything got destroyed. Same with a lot of these other little buildings. I have no idea. Like, maybe around the middle here, but... Like, I'm seeing some of the same shapes. I have no fucking idea. Who fucking cares? Fuck Lebanon. The woke... Wait, the woke right...
So J.D. Vance, to another issue, was that this moment.
Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated? I certainly think the answer is yes, and I agree. Jesus Christ does not. I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. The president
fucking cares.
Russia is cracking down on the internet.
Thanks, Toto.
Speaking of all this war talk, did you hear that China is threatening to nuke Japan for defending Taiwan?
Yeah, who cares? Thanks for the donation, Dodo. Dodo, don't you tell there's no VG? The Nazis saying Hitler asked the Jews to leave first in that tweet I sent you is a mega anti-Israel right-wing podcaster. He's friends with Kash Patel.
You familiar with the Stu Peters? Does that name ring a bell?
Oh, that guy. Okay. Yeah, he's literally a Nazi. I know him. Yeah, and he is friends with Kash Patel, and then Kash Patel lied. Thanks for the donation, though, Dodo.
You know, seeing how these SJWs call everyone war criminals, I would love to see how they try to defend China now.
Yeah, they probably still would because they don't really have any morals or whatever. Thanks for the donation.
The result? Anger and frustration, and a spring of growing discontent. For years, Russia has sought to take the internet under total government control and potentially cut it off from the rest of the world. It's blocked tens of thousands of websites, messaging apps, and social media platforms that refuse to cooperate with authorities. Internet users had gotten used to circumventing the restrictions by using VPNs, virtual private networks which create an encrypted connection between the internet and a device. But the government has been blocking these too. Last year, the restrictions reached a whole new level, sweeping shutdowns of cell phone internet connections, and sometimes broadband too, leaving only a handful of websites and apps on government-approved whitelists.
В начале года Путин легализовал эту практику, он подписал закон, который позволяет устраивать шатдауны, отключать любые средства связи по указу самого же Путина, и исполняет это ФСБ. То есть ФСБ был дан такой второй, более серьезный рубильник интернета, который может выключить все и включить белые списки, которые как-то оказались пока еще не урегулированы.
The government claims they're needed to thwart Ukrainian drones relying on Russian cell phone internet for navigation.
Эти действия настолько долго, насколько необходимо.
Yeah, sure. Dodo, there's only 7 Democrats voted to not block weapons sales to Israel. Don't vote Democrat. They're all getting infested by fucking communist retards.
How many kids will they kill today? Money for homes and homes, USA.
Like, these people just need to be locked up in jail. Oh, wow. He likes crackers. Bread. Yeah, Gummy likes crackers and bread, too. Thanks for the donation, Dodo. Yeah, I saw Johnny Smelly got sentenced to prison. Who fucking cares?
Level. Spoiled children who've become useless adults, enabled the whole path by loving parents. It certainly feels good to give money to a panhandler on the street, and it certainly helps them out in the moment. But at the same time, it also enables them to stay in an awful living condition. About 2/3 of Americans give to charity, and that's probably a number that holds up in most countries.
About how many calories are you eating per day on your diet? How are you managing to get enough protein? Your protein shakes must taste so fucking disgusting. Like 50 to 100 grams of powder per shake and 2 of them per day? What protein powder do you use ATM?
I'm eating 1,800 calories a day. I have 2 protein shakes a day. It's Lean Fit, organic protein powder. Thanks for that donation.
And they assume that giving equals helping, and it often does. Economically, the world is becoming a better place. But the elephant in the room is this: what if our good intentions are actually hurting the people we're trying to help?
Get out of the UK while you can.
These events, these activities, this unity must grow and continue and take over not just parts of Birmingham, but the whole of Birmingham, the whole of the West Midlands, the whole of the UK.
Watch as Iqbal Muhammad MP calls for his movement to take over the whole of the UK at a Your Party meeting with independent Muslim MPs and Jeremy Corbyn.
These events, these activities, this unity must grow and continue and take over not just parts of Birmingham, but the whole of Birmingham, the whole of the West Midlands, the whole of the UK. Grassroots democracy in action. And we, our communities, have shown the establishment and the rest of the country that we will not be taken for granted, and we will win. The establishment know that if you let one person stand up to them and speak the truth to people about what power is doing to them, then more.
Yeah, that's why you don't import Muslims. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
I'm Ken LaCourte. I dig into uncomfortable topics and try to give you straightforward answers. This one changed how I think about...
Did you see Sneeko got punched and thrown to the ground? No, 'cause I don't fucking care. He could do fentanyl and overdose. He could blow his own brains out with a shotgun. He could fucking, like, jump off a building. I don't give a fuck. I don't care.
Giving entirely, because many times charity isn't the solution, it's the problem. My goal here isn't to say all charities are worthless, not by a long shot. It's to help you, if you're looking to help others, do it in a smart way. We'll kick off looking at the problems with charities, problems that nonprofits can bring to the equation. Then we'll take a high-level peek at charity donations, because sometimes helping hands can harm millions of people. Then, the opposite. Grassroots giving that has little overhead or organizational problems, but has its own troubled math. Then, perhaps most importantly, the psychology of dependency, because it's both real and it's at the heart of the entire issue. And finally, we'll take a look at what actually works. Now, there are a lot of types of charitable causes, from medical research to animal rescues to the arts. Here, I'm just focusing on the ones that aim to directly help people improve their lives. So let's first start by taking a look at charities themselves, the organizations that ask us for money to do good things. Now, I don't want to trash that whole world by any means, but organizations are made of people, and people run the gamut from good to bad, hardworking to lazy. So outright charity fraud is rare, but we shouldn't pretend it doesn't exist. The founder of the Modest Needs Foundation embezzled about $2.5 million meant for low-income families. Instead, it went to his luxury Manhattan apartment and a high life with a fake board of directors that included his bartender and housekeeper. Years back, the president of United Way, one of the most trusted charities in the country, was sentenced to 7 years in prison for using donor money for lavish vacations and mistresses. Of course, in many ways, the biggest charity operation is the government itself. Food stamps, housing assistance, cash welfare. The fraud and waste there dwarfs the private sector. The U.S. OMB estimates bad payments for welfare programs alone exceeded $66 billion in 2024.
Oh, yeah.
Food stamps had an almost 12% error rate in 2023, with over $10 billion going to the wrong people or in the wrong amounts. And for the cash welfare program, the feds can't even tell you how much it lost because states aren't required to report it. But more common in the private world than outright fraud is bloated overhead. The United Breast Cancer Foundation raised over $45 million from car donations, saying the money would help fund breast cancer screenings. Investigators found that about $35 million of that went straight into the fundraising company and its vendors. Some went to high executive salaries, and just $127,000 went to actual breast cancer screenings. Heck, I remember giving a small donation to a children's hospital once, and over the next few years, they pretty much spent all of that money in mailing me every couple months asking for more money. I mean, that might have made sense on a macro level for them, but I wanted to help sick kids, and I didn't. Other charities morph from helping people to lobbying the government or becoming political entities. It makes it hard to trust where your money's going. Personally, I find myself giving to the smallest organization I can, where I can see what they do as closely as possible. Others go to a site like Charity Navigator that helps donors see where money actually goes. Now, some experts warn against focusing too much on overhead ratios, but the more information, the better. And that points to a deeper problem. Charities measure what they actually do, not whether it works. They look at how many meals they serve or how many hours were volunteered. Almost none of them measure whether they actually improve lives or whether fewer people need help next year because of their work. So now let's look at places where bad patterns play out on a massive scale. Charity donations, where we routinely see the unintended consequence of helping people gone bad. Those problems usually revolve around dependency and displacement. Let's start with our closets. When most of us donate old clothes, we probably imagine them going to somebody dressed in rags who needs them. Here's what actually happens. About 70% of donated clothing worldwide ends up in Africa. It gives people cheaper clothing, and it's also gutted local industries. In Ghana, textile and clothing employment fell by 80% from 1975 to 2000. In Zambia, the industry went from 25,000 workers in the 80s to half that by 2002. In Nigeria, textile manufacturing once employed over 200,000 people. Today, that number is essentially zero. The clothes arrive in shipping containers, get sorted into massive warehouses, and are sold in open-air markets for almost nothing. In Uganda, secondhand clothing, it accounts for about 80% of all clothing purchases. Local manufacturers, they can't compete with that, so an entire industrial sector across multiple countries have been wiped out by generosity. This happens far beyond the textile industry, because when foreigners come in with cheap help, it often prevents vital parts of an economy from even existing. And if you want to see what decades of charitable dependency looks like on a national scale, Haiti is a great example. As I mentioned, it has thousands of NGOs, one of the highest concentration of aid organizations anywhere on earth. Most of them are doing exactly what they set out to do. They dig wells, run clinics, distribute foods, and build schools. Each one individually is helping. Now, I produced a whole video just on Haiti, and there I learned that these charities, they've taken over the basic functions that a government should provide. Sanitation, electricity, clean water, education. The result is a government with no incentive to govern. Why build local infrastructure when a relief organization will do it for you? How do you build the local capacities when outsiders keep showing up and solving those problems to whatever extent they can? Haiti hasn't been helped into self-sufficiency.
I don't even understand the motivation for anybody to start charities to help these dumbasses. Like, they're a bunch of fucking idiot chimps. You can give chimpanzees free bananas. They're still going to act like chimps. They're going to be like infinite banana supply from some chimpanzee banana charity. Guess what? They're still going to like fucking claw each other to fucking death and just do dumb chimpanzee shit. So look at Haiti. Oh, look, the billions and billions of dollars that people have like poured into Haiti for charities. Oh, whoopee fucking diddly do. The chimps still act like fucking chimps. They're like shooting each other. They're all fucking broke and poor and can barely get food. That's after billions and billions and billions of dollars. You could have literally just put that money in a fucking like anything else and it would have been more productive. Like these people are just stupid. Dodo, don't you tell there's Chinese bots in the comments are loving this.
Lawmakers in Maine have passed a temporary ban on new large data centers in the state. And if
Yeah. Wow. Wang got schooled here. That is embarrassing.
I think the United States ought to be ahead.
But how is shipping chips to China keeping the U.S.
No.
ahead?
Am I in the United States? Do you consider me part of the United States?
Yes.
You consider NVIDIA a United States company? Okay. Number one. Why is it that we don't come up with a regulation that's more balanced so that NVIDIA can win around the world instead of giving up the world? Why would you want United States to give up the world?
Dario had this quote where he said, it's like Boeing bragging that we're selling North Korea nukes, but the missile casings are made by Boeing. And that's somehow enabling the U.S. technology stack. Like fundamentally, you're giving them this capability.
Comparing AI to anything that you just mentioned is lunacy.
But AI is similar to enriched uranium, right? And then it can have positive uses. It can have negative uses. We still don't want to send enriched uranium to other countries.
Who's sending enriched?
The analogy is enriched uranium
because
is like
it's a lousy analogy.
Dude, this guy is such a fucking sleazebag.
It's an illogical.
I like how he's just like just pointing out how fucking retarded this dude is.
Logical analogy.
I guess then the crux comes down to how does selling them chips now?
Yeah, he's never going to come on this podcast again.
Help us win in the long term. Like Tesla sold extremely good electric vehicles to China for a long time. iPhones are sold in China extremely good. They didn't cost them lock-in. China will still make their version of EVs and they're dominating, or smartphones are dominating.
The premise that even if we competed in China, that we're going to lose that market anyways. You're not talking to somebody who woke up a loser. And that loser attitude, that loser premise makes no sense to me. We're not a car. We are not a car. The fact that I can buy a car.
He does make a fair point here that China would have a lot more trouble developing an NVIDIA GPU. They might be able to catch up to like current day GPUs in like say 10, 15, maybe 20 years. But again, like American manufacturing, it would be ahead by that much more anyway. He kind of has a point there. They're not going to be able to reproduce an NVIDIA GPU. And it's not like they don't have access to these GPUs. We know that they smuggle them in. They have the ability to try to copy them, but like they literally can't. So we know they try, but they just can't. So he does have a fair point there.
This car brand one day and use another car brand another day. Easy. Computing is not like that. There's a reason.
China does not make the best motorcycles right now.
Reason why the x86 still exists. There's a reason why ARM is so sticky. Conceding a marketplace based on the premise you described, I simply can't acknowledge that. It makes no sense because I don't think the United States is a loser. Our industry is not a loser. And that losing proposition, that losing mindset makes no sense to me.
Okay.
The fundamental issue here is you're giving them technology that can make them win the AI race, and they could be extremely fucking dangerous. Like, it doesn't matter if NVIDIA would still have a majority market share in China. It's like if you're selling enriched uranium. Oh, America makes the best enriched uranium. We sell to China. China can't even make enriched uranium. And then they use that enriched uranium to make bombs and kill us. It's like, okay, great. You won the market. You're fucking dead now. Get through this whole video.
You're from Palestine? You're from Palestine? Sorry? It's difficult?
I don't think they're from Palestine.
You're not from Palestine? I thought because you had the tattoo that you were from Palestine. So you're from Palestine. You speak Arabic? Sorry? Oh, right, you're Israeli. Children is ridiculous.
Okay, great, wonderful. 21st, donate $2. How many blocks tofu is that? One. And is that one whole head of broccoli? Just frozen broccoli. Is that the only meal you had today besides the shakes? Yes. I guarantee you're not eating only 1,800 calories low. That's great. Thanks for the donation.
All I can say to the UK is the polar ice caps can't melt soon enough.
That's nice. Thanks for the donation.
If you're against giving billions of dollars in aid to chimps, then let's start with stopping aid to Ukraine and Israel then. You're against aid, right? Let's be...
Yeah, Ukraine and Israel aren't fucking chimps. You're a fucking chimp.
It's been kept on life support and in poverty, and that affects millions and millions of people. Now let's flip it. Let's go from the macro down to the personal level and take a look at grassroots giving. No fraud or bloated salaries, no government bureaucrats, just good, regular people trying to help through things like local food banks, building homes, or mission trips. Usually through small groups, often church-based. These seem like the purest form of giving, and they really are, but that still doesn't make the deeper problems go away. Because here we see two issues arise time and again: efficiency and, once again, dependency. Take food banks. What could be more straightforward than giving food to hungry people? But let's take a look at some numbers. In 2022, 49 million Americans depended on charitable food assistance. That's 1 in 6 people. This isn't emergency help for families going through a crisis. Almost 60% of working households that use food banks, they do it routinely as part of their monthly budgets. It's become permanent. And food banks, like most charities, measure their impact in output, not long-term results. Serving more meals is seen as a success, not more people who've become self-sufficient. Volunteer home building is another direct, tangible form of help. I mean, putting real roofs over people's heads is undeniably a good thing. Habitat for Humanity operates in over 70 countries and has served millions of families. They explicitly welcome unskilled volunteers and tell them no experience necessary. They design homes to be volunteer-friendly to build. But a side effect to that is free volunteer labor means fewer jobs for local construction workers. Unskilled Americans fly in and do work when they could have sent money to skilled local.
Have you started your racist arc? Are you Uncle Ruckus now? You're literally being racist against your own people, calling them retarded chimps and saying don't give Haitians or Africans any medical aid, food aid, etc. Let them starve.
Thank you. You're nice and retarded.
Locals who would have gotten paid instead. The volunteers go home feeling great, but it's a highly inefficient use of their money. The same dynamic occurs for people who go on mission trips overseas. The voluntourism industry generates between $2 and $3 billion annually and attracts millions of people each year just in the United States. People travel to a place in need to build, teach, or provide medical care. It's charity at its most personal. But again, let's look at the math. Let's say a person's volunteer trip to Africa costs $2,000.
Agreed, VG. Instead we should be giving aid to these cute little endangered porpoises instead.
Yeah, sure, why not? Thanks for the donation, Dodo. Dodo Nutellers react to this. He says, this Yeti promotes Adam Mockler.
Notice how he hasn't actually disagreed on a single example that it was taken out of context. He actually is defending or saying that all of them are correct.
Of Crimea was absolutely a justifiable annexation. What do you call Crimea? I call it part of Russian territory. Cry me a river, a Russian river. The annexation.
Look, he's joking. Now, to be fair,
he's joking. What do you mean he's joking? He's not. He's defended the opinion like a few days ago. What part of it? What is that a joke? What's the joke? What's funny? What's the joke there? What is he joking about?
There was an article that came out in the Telegraph, which they deleted because it got a little too close to the truth. And in that article, they spoke to Christians in Lebanon who were like, oh yeah, we got no problem with Hezbollah. They protect us from the psychotic Israelis.
What do you mean you don't understand it? You don't.
Hezbollah has massacred Christians, by the way.
You're too stupid to understand your own side? The reason why people were saying it is because people like Hassan hate America. That's the entire perspective they have. So the idea that Russia was going to invade from Hassan's perspective, you can listen to stream, he talks about this. It was U.S. State Department propaganda designed to make people in the West.
Yeah, whatever. Like, Kyle Klinsky is just a anti-Semite, fascist fucktard. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
At local wages of $2 a day, that's enough to fund 1,000 days of work. That's a year-round job for 4 people. Even within the United States, the numbers often don't add up. I mean, just a plane ticket for one volunteer costs about $600. That'll pay for a skilled or unskilled laborer in that area to work for a while. Researchers who studied short-term missions, they estimate that the vast majority of trip funds go to flights, hotels, and travel expenses, not to the community being served. The work that gets done, building homes, digging trenches, painting churches, it could have been done by local workers, and to be honest, the volunteers often do a mediocre job. The goal is helping a community, but the time and money spent in some ways weakens those communities in the long run. Overall, It's a reminder that doing something that feels good may not always be the best path. So in this video, we keep coming around to the question of, did it actually work? That's a question we all need to ask about personal finances as well, and it's where today's sponsor comes in. And too many people don't ask that question properly about their own investments. They chase whatever feels right, whatever performed well last year. They react to headlines instead of thinking long term. And then they panic when the bottom falls out. The people who actually build lasting wealth, they tend to think differently. They diversify. They don't put everything in one basket, especially one basket that could easily drop overnight. And for a lot of them, one of the baskets is physical gold, because it's an asset that often holds its value when paper money and stocks don't. Today's sponsor is Augusta Precious Metals. They make buying gold 052 for more info. All right, back to good intentions. Let's focus into the human brain and look at the psychology of dependency. Because often this isn't just about financial inefficiency. There's a human cost as well, something that took one psychologist 40 years to fully understand. I started seeing charity differently after I read a book by Robert Lupton. He's a
Dodo, Donatillers, can you please actually watch this, not skip it? It's not like you have anything else to watch because you keep skipping everything. No, I'm not watching that. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
a psychologist who spent his life doing urban ministry in Atlanta. He ran programs, organized volunteers, and watched what happened over the decades. He wrote Toxic Charity: How Churches and Charities Hurt Those They Help. And it's a book that really made me rethink the best ways to help people. In it, he shared a story about a Christmas adopt-a-family program he ran. Church volunteers would show up at housing projects with vans full of wrapped presents. The kids loved it, of course. The donors playing Santa Claus, they felt great too. But Lupton started noticing what it looked like from the other side. He saw a father watching strangers hand his children gifts he couldn't afford.
That reminder, by the way, China is responsible for them being nearly extinct in the first place at the 0.50 mark.
You'll be sure to see this, containers, jars, like mammal, is getting caught in fishing nets where they are drowned. It is now on the verge of extinction. The World Wildlife Fund has been fighting to save these critically endangered.
Yeah. Thanks for the donation, Dodo.
He described how he'd watched the men retreat into the back of the room, avoiding eye contact, some left entirely. Their dignity was being stripped away by the acts of kindness. In front of their own children, they were being shown by generous, well-meaning people that they couldn't provide for their own families, that somebody else had to do it for them. Lepton saw this happen year after year and started to see patterns that went far beyond Christmas. He saw that when help flows in only one direction, the whole dynamic is built on need, and that need grows. Recipients learn to wait rather than act. Lepton identified what he called the 5 steps to dependency. It starts with appreciation, genuine gratitude for help in a time of need. But if the help keeps coming, appreciation shifts to anticipation, people waiting for the next gift. Then comes expectation. It's no longer a surprise, it's assumed. That becomes entitlement, a sense that help is owed. And finally, dependency, the inability or unwillingness to function without it. This isn't a moral failing of the givers or the recipients, it's just how humans work. If someone keeps solving a problem for you, you stop trying to solve it yourself. It's why free food distribution didn't reduce hunger lines, it grew them. Volunteers who came to neighborhoods to plant flowers and pick up trash, they weren't helping residents take pride in their community. They were signaling that the residents couldn't do it themselves. The same family showed up year after year at the same Christmas giveaways, and nobody asked why they still needed help. Lepton described how one-way giving creates a hierarchy that's almost impossible to escape. The giver is permanently superior, and the receiver is permanently dependent. However warm the intentions, that dynamic can be dehumanizing and at the same time keep recipients from moving forward. At one point, he said, one of the surest ways to destroy self-worth is subsidizing the idleness of able-bodied people. I mean, that sounds harsh, but think about what it means to be on the receiving end of constant help. Every gift is a reminder that you can't provide for yourself. Every act of charity confirms your position at the bottom rung.
Well, it's just fucking laziness. If people know that they're going to get what they need from something else, they're just not going to actually go out and work. Like, what would be the point? So it's like, if you need charity for food, if you're using charity for food, and you would have to, like, actually get a job and work just to get the same food, why wouldn't you just sit on your ass and then just get the food you're gonna get anyway? So it's just laziness, and that's why you see so much welfare fraud. People just get fucking lazy because they know there's something to take advantage of.
The object of someone else's pity. Humans have an innate need to feel useful, to solve problems and build things and provide for their families. When charity takes those opportunities away, even with the best intentions, it doesn't lift people up. It hollows them out. Lepton also made a distinction that I like a lot. The difference between betterment and development. Betterment does things for people. It improves their conditions in the short term. Development does things with people. It strengthens their capacity. It's the embodiment of give a man a fish versus teach a man to fish. Betterment feels good and it shows quick results.
Didn't Mr. Beast do something in Africa where he helped, like, villages build a bunch of wells? I think it was, like, at least several hundreds. And then a few years later, I'm pretty sure, like, practically all of them aren't even usable right now, and it's because these people are idiots. It's not like he just had some contractors dig a bunch of wells. Like, they also went through the trouble to train them on how to, like, upkeep them, make sure they can keep getting water, like, repair, you know, whatever equipment they needed for it. And they're all just toast. None of them are working anymore because they're just fucking lazy and they don't want to do shit. And again, I'm assuming a lot of these areas, they get, like, charity anyway, so they just didn't fucking bother.
Results. I mean, if you give a panhandler some money, his day is immediately better. His long-term situation, not so much. Development is slower, messier, and not very Instagrammable. But development is what actually changes people's lives, and most charity is stuck in betterment. So this pattern isn't limited to private charity by any means. Government assistance programs, they create the same dynamic, just on a much larger scale. During COVID, the government sent larger unemployment checks that often paid people more than their actual jobs. For millions of workers, the rational move was to stay home as long as the checks kept coming, and many did as long as they could. Now, that's partly a judgment about people who made that choice, but more so an observation about incentives. I mean, if you pay people more to stay home than to work, how do you criticize them too much? The same issues run through food stamps, housing vouchers, disability programs. They provide a genuine safety net for people who need it, but they also can create what economists call a benefits cliff, where people's apparently rational choices help them stay poor for decades. What ties all of this together? Private charity, government programs, mission trips, food banks. It's a question that almost nobody asks. Are the people we're helping becoming more capable or less? Most charities don't seem to even consider that question. Hey, as always, if I mess up something serious here, let me know. I'll fix it in the comments below. You can find my source notes, all sorts of stuff down there. Okay, so if charity often creates dependency, what actually works? Because there are people and organizations out there getting this right. The difference is how they think about the problem. So emergency relief is the clearest case of charity done right. After an earthquake, a flood, or a personal crisis, no one worries about dependency. I mean, if people are dying or need medical care, you send them what it takes to make them right. That's not toxic charity, it's saving lives and helping people. The issue is when help never ends. I mean, most charities are built for relief and they never make the transition because relief is easier to fund. It's easier to feel good about. A photo of a hungry child, that gets donations. A photo of a microfinance training session, that's a little harder. But the organizations that actually reduce poverty are the ones that deliberately shift from relief to development. On an international scale, we've seen that happen successfully. Bangladesh emerged from overwhelming poverty to become a low middle income nation within 40 years. In the 70s, they shifted from handing out food and relief to long-term development. The key was treating causes, not just symptoms. The goal was self-sustaining people, and millions of households have graduated out of extreme poverty with that. Rwanda took aid after the 1994 genocide, but it also pushed its own development agencies. After it learned to say no to donor priorities that didn't align with its long-term goals, it reduced extreme poverty by 1/3 between 2000 and 2017. And it says it's no longer looking for charity, but investment. I can point to a good number of similar examples because infrastructure and education and justice systems, when they're in place, job creation does what no
See you later.
charities can. Some churches and food banks are using the same principles. Instead of just handing out free groceries, they've created food co-ops where families pay a small amount, maybe $3 or $4 for $30 worth of food. The families do the work, boxing, sorting, distributing. They're customers and contributors, not just recipients. Other organizations have turned clothing closets into thrift stores that teach job skills. Soup kitchens have become catering businesses run by the people who used to eat there. I mean that we should stop.
I was gonna maybe watch this whole thing. It just seems like bullshit. Fuck it.
Hey folks, it's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to...
Okay.
$4 a day. That's our best estimate for what the average person earned throughout most of human history. For thousands of years, that number barely moved. We unlocked metallurgy with the blast furnace, nothing happened to income. In 1440, the printing press enabled sharing knowledge on a massive scale, still nothing. The seed drill came in the 16th century, and still people weren't much better off. And then, in 1776, James Watt designed his steam engine. And this happened.
We call this period the Industrial Revolution. It changed everything. Life expectancy, food security, the very structure of human civilization. All thanks to the steam engine. Well, not really.
This is the aioli pile. It was first described around 25 BC, around the time of the founding of the Roman Empire. You heat up the water inside, and the steam gets expelled through these angled tubes. The crazy thing is, that's basically a steam engine. The Romans had this.
But that raises the obvious question, why the hell didn't the Romans industrialize? The Roman Empire had everything going for it. They had power, they had stability, they had trade, they had amazing engineering. They built aqueducts, they built villas with underfloor heating. They built this place, and it's still standing almost 2,000 years later. And yet, the average Roman peasant didn't live much better than the average peasant 1,000 years before them. That's kind of puzzling, right? Think about how much better your life is compared to that of a person that lived 1,000 years ago. There are a ton of theories about why the Industrial Revolution happened when and where it did, but in this video I want to make the case for one of them. A theory that won its author
Donate $2. Oh look, YouTube's being retarded again by taking down fact-based videos for hate speech. I have no idea if his video is taken down for hate speech. What the fuck is this? It's fucking assholes using fucking AI thumbnails?
Joel Mokyr the 2025 Nobel Prize in Economics. The central concept of his theory is what he calls useful knowledge. Mokyr splits all knowledge into two types.
The first is propositional knowledge, the systematic understanding of how the world works. Newton's laws of motion, the laws of thermodynamics, germ theory, let's just call this the ideas. The second is prescriptive knowledge, the practical know-how of how to build things, manufacturing techniques, engineering methods, the hands-on craft of making the world work. Let's call this the things. Now, useful knowledge is generated from a feedback loop between the two. For example, the microscope, which is a thing, can lead to the discovery of germ theory, an idea, and that in turn can lead to the discovery of antibiotics, which are a thing again. And it just goes on like this.
You need both the things and the ideas to grow, and most importantly, you need them together. What's crazy is that this feedback loop is essentially absent in every major civilization before 18th century Europe, including Rome. Now, Mokyr's work is vast, and I can't possibly cover all of it here, but when you look at Rome versus Britain through his ideas, three barriers keep coming up. And these are three barriers that Britain managed to overcome and Rome didn't. The first barrier is the most fundamental. To have progress, you actually have to believe that progress is possible. This definitely sounded strange to me the first time I heard it. Like, what do you mean is progress possible? Look around you, it's basically everywhere. But as I found out, the dominant worldview for most of human history was basically the opposite. And Rome was no exception to that. Roman culture had a really deep, almost religious reverence for their ancestors. The great men were the ancient men, and the best days were the old days. Horace, a famous Roman poet, ends one of his poems like this.
Our parents' era, worse than their ancestors, bore us still worse. And soon we will give more wicked offspring.
So what Horace is saying here is that every generation is just always a little worse than the previous one. They thought society was degenerating.
This attitude continued for most of human history. But in the 18th century, something...
If only they had known that TikTok would happen. They have no clue.
Changed that we can actually measure. This is Google Ngram. It tracks how often certain words appear in printed texts over time. Look at what happens to words like progress and improvement in the mid-1700s. You can see that these words were barely in use before, and then they just suddenly spiked massively. This was the time of the Enlightenment, and with the Enlightenment came, for the first time in history, a belief in progress. For example, here's what the English philosopher Joseph Priestley thought the future would look like. Nature, including both its materials and its laws, will be more at our command. Men will make the situation in this world abundantly more easy and comfortable. They will probably prolong their existence in it and will grow daily more happy.
Priestley sounds pretty optimistic here, but this wasn't blind optimism. People like Isaac Newton were making discoveries proving that the universe follows a set of laws. They overturned the wisdom of the ancients, showing that modern men could do better than the philosophers of classical Greece and Rome. All this led to a general optimism about the future. people started to believe that the future could and should be better. So the Europeans managed to overcome the first barrier. They cultivated a genuine belief in progress where the Romans didn't. But Rome had a lot of people, and surely not all of them thought that it was all just going to be downhill from here. Which brings us to our second barrier. Let's say you've got your avant-garde Roman genius who does believe in progress. What happens next? Well, nothing, because there's no way for him to make a living. There's a fundamental problem with the production of knowledge. You see, knowledge is what economists call a non-excludable good. You spend years figuring something out, and then you share it, and now everyone knows it for free. Basically, if you can't capture the value of your discovery, you starve to death. So how did the Romans address this problem? In ancient Rome, there were basically two options for this. Either you were born very rich, or you found someone else who was born very rich and got them to fund you in exchange for making them look very smart. This is called patronage. But there's a simple problem with patronage, and that is that you only get paid for doing what the elites want. And the Roman elites wanted liberal arts, so philosophy, poetry and rhetoric. Seneca made it pretty clear when he said this:
I respect no study and deem no study good, which results in money making.
Engineering, which happens to make money a lot of the time, was literally the work of slaves and tradespeople. So if you were an intellectual, you were not going to get paid for it. According to Seneca, the smartest Romans should spend their time trying to figure out how to live a morally good life. Now, contrast this with the 17th century philosopher Francis Bacon, who said this:
The true and lawful goal of the sciences is none other than this, that human life be endowed with new discoveries and powers.
Bacon basically explicitly stated that the most important thing to study was how to make people better off. There was a massive shift in the mindset at the time. During the Enlightenment, scientists also started gaining genuine social prestige. Isaac Newton served in Parliament, Francis Bacon became Lord Chancellor, and inventors could directly profit from their inventions through the new patent laws. Being a scientist for the first time actually became lucrative, but that still doesn't explain everything, right? I mentioned earlier that the other option for a Roman is to simply be born rich. So let's say our progress-minded Roman genius is born independently wealthy and so doesn't need patronage. What happens now? Well, most likely our hypothetical Roman won't go near a workshop. And if he did, his peers would mock him for it. I think this might be the biggest cultural barrier of Rome. Philosophers dealt with ideas, craftsmen dealt with things, and that is just how it was meant to be. But that means that the ideas and the things never met. The people who understood how the world worked never built anything, and the people who built things had no idea why they worked. There was no feedback loop, because the two sides of it were living in completely different worlds. So imagine Heron of Alexandria describing his steam engine to his peers. There was just no one around who could look at that and say, damn, this would make my life or my work so much easier. Contrast this with the Enlightenment, where the French philosopher Denis Diderot said this:
It is for the liberal arts to lift the mechanical arts from the contempt in which prejudice has for so long held them.
So Diderot is explicitly talking about lifting up the social status of the people who dealt with things. And that was the general spirit ever since Francis Bacon proclaimed that the goal of science was to make people better off. And it was actually Bacon who proposed that the craftsmen who experimented and the scientists who thought needed to find a middle ground. So fast forward a couple years and you actually have your ideas people, the scientists, working together with your things people, the craftsmen. So universities hired tool makers and scientific societies employed dedicated instrument makers. And so James Watt, who himself had no university degree, got hired by the University of Glasgow as an instrument maker.
One day, a professor asked him to repair a model of an atmospheric steam engine for a natural philosophy class. And Watt took a look at it and noticed that it was pretty inefficient. And then he fixed it. And precisely this fix is what you probably today now know as the invention of the steam engine. The technology that probably gets the most credit for kicking off the Industrial Revolution.
So all it really took was a philosopher and a craftsman working together shoulder to shoulder in the same building. The ideas and the things working together to produce useful knowledge. So let's bring this back to where we started. Why did Rome have a steam engine but never use it. Because they failed on all 3 counts. 1, they didn't believe that the future could be better than the past. 2, they incentivized poets and philosophers and not engineers. And 3, they built...
Yeah. Shows you just how useful the humanities are in university. So, what a load of bullshit.
An artificial social wall.
And the fucking humanities are just infested with communists now, so, if anything, yeah, they're really holding society back.
Between the people who dealt with ideas and the people who dealt with things. Europe in the 1700s, by coincidence, got all 3 of them right. People, for the first time in history, realized that the world was getting better. A new culture of scientific prestige made discovery rewarding, and a growing tradition of scientists and craftsmen actually talking to each other finally closed the loop between things and ideas.
So the Europeans got almost everything correct, but if you want to see what it looks like to get almost everything wrong, check out my video on the...
That's pretty crazy.
I want to talk...
That Rome had a steam engine.
30.
Pretty weird to think how different things could have been. Why am I getting recommended some of these fucking channels? Yeah, the one thing I'm disappointed in is that Johnny Smalley only got 6 months. Should have gotten a life sentence. After 6 months, this guy's gonna even be a bigger jackass. Somebody should just break his legs or something so he can't walk outside. Fucking piece of shit. Who's the best looking female Tekken character? I guess the girl I'm most attracted to in Tekken 8 would have to be Reina. So...
talk about Wang Mang today because that dude is a contender for being the absolute goat of terrible economic policy. If you haven't heard about him, you're in for a treat because he might just have the worst track record in all of history when it comes to economic competence. So he was born in 45 BC as a son of Wang Mang, who probably went his entire life without knowing how funny his name was, and they were part of like a secondary branch of the Chinese royal family. I think he was the cousin of the emperor or something, but the important thing is just that he wasn't in the line of succession. So growing up, Mang was slowly making a name for himself, becoming known for being competent and scholarly and just an all-around good dude. Like, he was caring for his extended family when they were sick, reading Confucius, and just generally doing all the things that were expected of a promising young Chinese noble. But I suspect it might have been a facade, because eventually he ended up poisoning the reigning emperor and usurping his throne to start his own Xin dynasty. Although personally, I think it's a bit of a stretch calling it that, because he was the only emperor of said dynasty. Anyway, the whole murder and usurpation thing wasn't actually the problematic part. The real problem started when it became time for Wang Mang to actually rule. You see, Mang wasn't just reading Confucius, more like he was absolutely obsessed with his writings. He became convinced that to usher in another golden age, he'd have to restore the empire to how it was under the Zhao dynasty, which was when Confucius was writing, which at that point was something like 500 years back. And so in his mission to Confucify everything, Wang got up to some extremely wacky antics. For example, he believed in his own version of what's called the rectification of names, which is a Confucian doctrine that states that things should be named in accordance with reality and it's supposed to aid societal harmony. Well, Wang Mang took it a step further because he seemed to think that not only should things be named in accordance with reality, but also the other way around, in the sense that things would start acting in accordance to their name. So essentially, Wang Mang seemed to think that he could change the nature of things simply by changing their names, and naturally he got completely obsessed with just renaming everything in his empire, like cities and landmarks. But he didn't stop at material things, no. At one point, he even outlawed giving your children names that are more than one Chinese character long. What could possibly be the logic behind such a law, you may ask? Well, it turns out in Confucius' writings, most of the characters just have one character names, so obviously that must be the correct way to name people. Apparently, this is also the reason why everyone in the Three Kingdoms novel, for example, only has one character names, because it took a couple hundred years for that trend to die down again. But probably the most absurd of all his renaming shenanigans was when he attempted to unilaterally rename a very powerful nomadic confederation from Zhongnu, which meant ferocious slaves, to Gongnu, which meant respectful slaves, because he believed it would actually make them less ferocious and thus easier to deal with. He also apparently couldn't stop himself from changing the official title of the leader of said confederation to a pun. In fact, he actually did it twice. Anyway, this kicked off a pretty big conflict that lasted longer than his dynasty, and it wasn't even the only war that he started like that. But I don't want to spend too much time on his diplomacy or his foreign policy, because this video is about his economic policy. And he had strong opinions in that area as well. So at this point, I should reiterate that the time of the Zhao dynasty, which they were trying to mimic, was about 500 years back. And seeing as this was around the year 0, historic records weren't exactly perfect. So Mang Wang and his court spent a lot of their time just reading Confucian classics or legends of the time in order to figure out how exactly things were run back then. In fact, this took up so much time that they kind of neglected governing the empire that they were currently running. So an example of this is that at some point Wang Mang decided that the pay scale that the preceding Han dynasty used for the empire's bureaucrats and administrators was unacceptable, and obviously it had to be replaced with the pay scale that the Zhao dynasty used. The only problem with that was that at the time they had no idea what that pay scale actually was, so he just stopped paying their wages for years. The funny thing is, when he finally figured out how they were paid in the Zhao dynasty, it turned out that it was based on how prosperous the empire was at that time. And since that is a really subjective metric, he just decided to continue not paying them, so bureaucrats and administrators just got no wages until the end of his dynasty. Unsurprisingly, this resulted in one of the most corrupt administrations in all of history, as the civil servants literally had to rely on bribes to put food on their tables. I wanted to mention this because the absolutely insane levels of corruption will actually explain why some of his later policies fail as disastrously as they do. Apart from not paying his employees, Wang Mang also had other interesting policy ideas. At one point, he decided to nationalize all the land in the empire for the purpose of redistribution. He called it Wang Tian, which basically means Wang's fields, because he was humble like that. This was, like most of the things he did, also copied from the Zhao dynasty, where they called it the well-field system. Unlike them though, Wang Mang didn't have a functioning administration, as he didn't pay them. And also unlike them, Wang Mang was just not particularly interested in making sure things ran smoothly at all. So the officials who administered the whole thing essentially just started handing out the land to their clan members and whoever would bribe them, and it ended up working out so terribly that even the farmers, who were supposed to be the main beneficiaries of this whole exercise, ended up hating it. It was such a colossal failure that even though just criticizing the system was punished by exile, it ended up being so massively unpopular that Wang was forced to abolish it after just 3 years. As you can imagine, this didn't translate into great fiscal results, so in an attempt to fill the empire's dwindling coffers, Mang instituted a bunch of other policies. One of his smarter moves was setting up a 10% income tax for a bunch of sectors, which, fun fact, is often cited as the first example of an income tax in all of history. This ended up being massively unpopular, of course, but it did end up lasting 12 whole years, which makes it one of Mang's more successful policies. He also tried setting up government monopolies on various industries. However, as he still wasn't paying any of his administrators, they ended up pocketing most of the proceeds, and so almost nothing ever reached the imperial treasury. Another attempt at raising revenue was the so-called sloth tax, which was essentially a tax on having uncultivated land or not working if you're a citizen. In classic Mang fashion, he did not think this through all the way because the whole tax applied without any exceptions. This caused a whole bunch of people who couldn't work or who had properties that were just not suitable for cultivation to either abandon their property or just sell themselves into slavery to help their family pay the tax. The whole selling yourself into slavery part is actually particularly ironic because Mang outlawed the slave trade a while earlier. Mind you, he did not have a problem with slavery itself, no, he just thought you shouldn't be able to trade them. Apparently that's what Confucius would have wanted. But arguably the funniest thing is that through all of this, Wang Mang just could not stop himself from introducing more and more coins. Well, technically not just coins, but we will get to that. So before Wang Mang took charge, the empire had one coin, keeping it simple. But obviously this wasn't Confucian enough for our boy. No, he wanted 28 different kinds of coins. And you would think that would be enough, but no. When I was researching this, I kept getting confused because I kept reading different numbers for how many denominations he ultimately introduced. And that's because he apparently didn't just stick to using coins as money, but he also made currency from tortoise shells and cowrie shells, which
Sleepy, donate $2 low.
Now I have a lawsuit against Google, and the judge is probably just going to dismiss the case, but I pray for the day I found out who this evil, degenerate employee is that is just some type of psychopathic, sociopath, I don't know, evil, degenerate person that deletes these reviews of people pouring their heart out, you know, telling their sad story about how they got botched with this doctor, and then he calls up Google or writes them, it probably doesn't even have to write them a check, just has some buddies at Google that will delete the reviews for him. You know, what type of person does that? What type of person is okay with removing a review of a horrendous, horrific, factual experience, and not only that, not only suppressing the horrific story, but now he can do that to more people.
Yeah, Frank's a dumbass. Thanks for the donation, Sleepy.
Apparently are not coins. And that says something because Wang Mang had a very broad definition of what constitutes a coin. Like this abomination. This is called a knife coin because, well, there is a knife attached to the coin. In the end, there were like 37 different kind of coin denominations that were used in the Xin dynasty, but I don't even think that properly conveys how stupid the whole system was. Because they didn't come in useful intervals like today's denominations come, like 1, 2, 5, 10 cent and so on. They did have some useful intervals. It would be hard to avoid that entirely with 37 different types of coins, but they also had a bunch of really strange ones and also duplicate coins. So for example, there was a $3 seashell, which was unique, so it had a purpose, but there was also a 10, a 30 and a $50 seashell, which there were also copper coins for these values. And the intervals weren't also always super logical. Like the next biggest seashell after the $50 seashell was a $216 seashell. Why $216? I have no idea, but I would be willing to bet money on the fact that it somehow goes back to Confucius again. There was, of course, also a $2,160 tortoise shell coin, as well as a $1,580 silver coin. So this whole hodgepodge of denominations made giving out change a massive headache. There's a great stand-up maths video about exactly this topic, go watch it if you're interested. There's also another problem, and that is called Gresham's law. Gresham's law is a monetary principle that states that bad money drives out good money. What this means, if you have two different coins with the same nominal value, so let's say they're both worth $1, but different intrinsic values. For example, if one of them was made out of gold and the other one was a freaking seashell, you would probably like to hold on to the gold coin and go spend the seashell coin, just in case this whole seashell thing doesn't catch on. The problem then becomes that since everybody would like to hold on to their gold and spend the currency that's intrinsically less valuable because you can collect it on the beach, the gold eventually stops circulating in the economy because nobody is using it for any trades anymore. And that's what we mean with bad money driving out the good money, so the gold in this case. Initially,
yeah, similar thing happened with tobacco in the United States. They used to use tobacco as money, and then they'd use shitty tobacco to buy stuff and hoard the good tobacco. I've not tried In-N-Out fries. I don't think we have In-N-Out in Canada.
When I researched this whole coin thing, I thought, man, this must be the best example in all of history of bad money driving out good money. But it turns out the whole system was so stupid that it didn't even come to that. So the currency was really susceptible to counterfeit, for which the punishment, funnily enough, was slavery. In fact, Wang Mang really seemed to like sending all the people who broke his laws into slavery, but that's another issue altogether. Because of the issues with the counterfeit currency and also just the general unwieldiness of the entire system, people just kinda stopped using money altogether. Like the entire monetary economy just ground to a screeching halt. Eventually, people adapted by just starting to use the old Han Dynasty coins again, which funnily enough was also illegal, but the whole thing was such a disaster that Mang was eventually forced to abolish 35 out of his 37 coins again anyway. At that point, the damage had been done though, and people just lost so much trust in the system that they just continued using the old Han Dynasty coins anyway. So those were kind of the highlights of Mang Wang's career. Eventually he ended up being killed in a massive peasant rebellion, which surprisingly enough wasn't caused by his policies. Instead, a couple years into his reign, there was a catastrophic shift of the Yellow River, which led to a big famine and a massive displacement of peasants, which eventually triggered the peasant rebellions that would be his demise. But in classic Wang Mang fashion, he didn't just die a normal, boring death, because when he was killed, people started arguing about who would get the credit for having killed him, and this eventually led to a fight which resulted in dozens of dead soldiers. His head was then cut off and delivered to the provisional capital of the new emperor, who then impaled it on a spike and put it on the wall, but the people were so angry that they took it off the wall and started kicking it around, and then also apparently one person ate his tongue. I don't know if back then that was considered an appropriate reaction, but personally it just seems a bit unnecessary. Apparently the head was eventually preserved and kept in a court vault until it was destroyed in a fire a couple hundred years later. Anyway, this seems like a fitting end for this iconic man, and if you have
What a jackass. It's funny how there's so many jackasses just ruining shit.
It's the 1920s and almost every major economy is booming. The Roaring Twenties was a decade defined by its opulence, opportunity, and hope for the future. With the end of the First World War in 1917, the global economy was supercharged and led by American industrial growth, which then boasted almost half of the world's total output. From 1920 to 1929, the US economy grew by a massive 42%, spurred on by the widespread adoption of mass production and the introduction of electricity. The UK and France rebuilt and maintained their powerful colonial empires, and even Germany was starting to see a major economic rebound by 1923. However, the economic euphoria came to a screeching halt.
It was panic. 16.5 million shares of stock sold in a single day. Sold hopelessly, desperate, at any price.
The market crash of 1929 and subsequent Great Depression steamrolled the global economy. US industrial production plummeted by 47% and unemployment soared to 20%, decimating the growth of the prior decade. Every major economy experienced incredible contractions to their outputs, incomes, and workforces. Well, except for one. Largely cut off from global economic banking and trade, as well as not being subject to demand shocks, the Soviet Union was a single country that didn't just get through the Great Depression, but thrived. Rather than contracting, the Soviet economy continued its dramatic economic and industrial boom, increasing its total industrial output between 1929 and 1934 by a whopping 50%, all while maintaining effectively zero unemployment. In light of such a major economic downturn in contrast, some Western economists praised the Soviet communist system, with some going as far as to claim its superiority over Western capitalism. In just a span of 40 years, the Soviet Union went from being a backwards, impoverished agricultural monarchy to being the defeater of fascism, the first to launch a satellite and man into orbit, and the largest sole proprietor of weapons of mass destruction ever. The Soviet Union catapulted itself onto the world stage as just one of the two remaining superpowers, yielding the largest military and second largest economy. However, as quickly as it arose, the Soviet Union collapsed as a result of its crumbling economy. But why? How is the once envied Soviet economy now in ruins, only to have left a bloodied print on human history? This is the story of the Soviet economy. To truly understand the Soviet economy and the path it ultimately took, we need to first understand the fundamental forces and conditions that caused it to arise in Russia in the first place. To do this, we have to travel all the way back to the 14th century. Following the fall of the Roman Empire, the dominant form of European governments was feudalism. Feudalism was a system in which a king would personally own all the land in the country. To maintain control and security, the king would then divide up the land and distribute it to a class of lords. In return for the land, the lords would then provide military for the king when needed. The lords would then make use of their holdings by forcing the vast peasant population to pay for living and working on the land by paying heavy taxes and performing extensive unpaid labor. This was called serfdom, and the peasants, known as serfs, were tied to the land, meaning they were not allowed to move away without the lord's consent. This system was designed to exploit the vast lower class and have the small amounts of wealth produced to trickle upwards to the elites. A system that acts in this way is known as an extractive economic system, and it is held in place by an extractive political system. The political system in this case was simple. The only people with control to change things in the country were the small group of lords and kings. Therefore, it was nearly impossible for the peasant situation to improve, since the elites had a vested interest for things to stay the same, and for a long time, they did. However, in the year 1346, in the port city of Tana, where the Don River meets the Black Sea in modern-day Russia, the first known European case of bubonic plague, or Black Death, appeared. Having been spread from China via the Silk Road, the plague quickly swept across Europe, killing nearly 50% of the population anywhere it went. The extreme loss of life of the peasant population shook the foundations of the feudal system to its core. With a new massive scarcity of labor, suddenly the value of peasant labor had skyrocketed, and thus the power to bargain. Faced with a shortage of workers, desperate lords across Europe started to try and steal one another's peasants by promising to require no extensive work and/or reduce taxes. This resulted eventually in a near, or in some places total, abolishment of unpaid labor, significantly increasing peasants' living conditions, wealth, and eventually power to demand further changes. By 1351, the English government, in an attempt to maintain the power and wealth of the elites, instituted a statute that punished peasants with prison time if they moved from their current lord's land. This would have the effect of fixing wages and unpaid labor requirements to pre-plague levels. Not willing to see their newfound freedoms go away, this culminated in the 1381 Peasant Rebellion in England, which saw the rebels taking London. Eventually, the rebellion was put down by the king. However, there was never another attempt to enforce the statute. This happened all over Western Europe, effectively creating a new, more inclusive labor market. Opposite to an extractive economic system, an inclusive one does not rely on the desires of the upper class, but on the equilibrium of markets. Therefore, wages cannot be artificially lowered, but rather workers are paid based on their value to their employer. While in the case of Western European peasants after the plague, the system was by no means inclusive. However, it was importantly less extractive than before. This small gain in wealth caused a small gain in power to act and organize in the future. Over time, this compounded until, when the time was right, a broad coalition of workers, soldiers, businessmen, etc. could then rise up to make demands or even remake the system to be more inclusive. When a coalition is sufficiently broad, it makes it so no one single group is able to make a power grab to cement themselves as the new elite, becoming equally as tyrannical as the old ones. Eventually, this led to secure property rights, a crucially important foundational element for the Industrial Revolution, which supercharged national economies and living standards for all that lived in them. This was the story of economic development in Western Europe. However, it contrasted drastically with Eastern Europe. Unlike their western counterparts, the peasants in the east were more spread out, lived in smaller villages, and were less organized, while their lords controlled larger and more powerful swaths of land. In response to the labor scarcity caused by the bubonic plague, the eastern lords snapped up more lands and added to their holdings, while also clamping down on the peasant population even more harshly. Since the eastern peasants were less powerful, their rebellions either didn't happen or failed miserably. They didn't see any new freedoms afforded to them, but rather had even more taken from them. This was further exacerbated by the 16th century, when Western demand for agricultural products like livestock and wheat produced in the East grew rapidly. With this increased demand, the lords saw it in their best interest to place even tighter controls on the peasants, demanding more unpaid labor and levying even more taxes. The gap in wealth, power, and freedoms between the peasants in the West and East grew large. This fundamental divide in Europe compounded over the centuries. While in the West, the lower classes were eventually able to overthrow absolute monarchies and replace them with much more inclusive constitutional ones, or even republics, the Eastern Kingdom stayed almost exactly the same, or even became more extractive. First in the British Isles, then in the US, and later in Western continental Europe, the Industrial Revolution began in the mid-18th century. Spurred on by fair legal systems and property rights on intellectual property, people could now profit off of discovering new inventions and processes without fear of someone robbing them of their ideas. This caused an explosion of new patents, inventions, and systems, which dramatically increased the productivities and efficiencies of industries and economies. For the first time in history, sustained economic growth occurred, and the living standards of all increased exponentially. By the turn of the 20th century, powerful industrial manufacturing bases were established in Britain, France, Germany, and the United States. However, the Industrial Revolution was faced with staunch opposition in the Eastern countries that still maintained absolute monarchies and extractive systems like that of the Russian Empire. In the year 1850, Russia comprised 1/7 of the entire Earth's landmass, stretching from Germany all the way to Canada, yet its total economy was relatively small and its citizens still poor. This was not for without good reason. Russia was still based on the feudal system of the 14th century, meaning the king, known as a Tsar, had near total control over
My name is Pen. I'm a pen tester. I like to let strangers shit in my mouth.
That's nice. I like taking naps. Thanks for the donation, Pen.
over his population, and the small nobility class exploited the poor by being in charge of the old traditional industries. The king and the elites feared the creative destruction that was brought on by industrialization. Creative destruction refers to the process of new inventions or systems that upend old industries and replace them with more efficient and productive ones, thereby taking wealth and resources away from the established elite class while also building a more powerful middle class that would be able to challenge the current system. Therefore, to keep control, the Tsar actively stopped industrialization, effectively curtailing economic growth during the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century. As a result, the Russian Empire was an extremely backwards, impoverished state which had very little in the way of freedoms for the population. Serfdom was finally abolished in the Russian Empire in 1861. However, it was replaced with a system that kept many of the same oppressions with little increase in quality of life. By this point, Russia was woefully behind the others in terms of heavy industry and military. Before 1853, the entire Russian Empire had only a single railway. This only changed when the decisive defeat of the Crimean War showed that their lack of rail was a major security threat against their much more industrialized neighbors. By 1914, the Russian society, outraged from centuries of oppression under a tyrannical monarchy, had been repeatedly revolting unsuccessfully in an attempt to gain the freedoms those in the West had enjoyed. Coupled with a Tsar that was particularly incompetent, Nicholas II, and an embarrassing defeat against the Japanese in 1905, the seeds of revolution had been sown and the entire system had grown unstable. Then, on August 1st, 1914, Germany, because of obligations to defend Austria-Hungary after its invasion of Serbia, declared war on Russia. By 1917, Russia was losing badly to the Germans, its people were starving, its economy had collapsed, and its ruler, Nicholas II, had made some pretty terrible political decisions, like placing himself as the commander of the military while leaving his German wife in charge of the country. Protests erupted in Petrograd, soldiers began a mutiny, and Vladimir Lenin, the exiled head of the Communist Bolshevik Party, was smuggled into the country by the Germans, who had hoped would cause further internal conflict, which it did. Under enormous pressure, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne, which had been held by his family for over 300 years. The country quickly became divided between the provisional government.
Wasn't a lot of that also to do with him being a cuck and his wife was fucking that weird dude with the 13-inch dick?
Government held by the less radical
Grigory Rasputin.
Revolutionaries and the much more organized and radical communist Bolsheviks. Eventually, the country broke into a bloody and grueling 3-year-long civil war. By the end, Russia was in ruins and the communists, under the command of Lenin, had taken and cemented control of the country, formally creating the Soviet Union shortly after. The ideology of the communists were based on the ideas of the German philosopher Karl Marx. He believed a constant battle between capitalism and workers would ultimately result in a revolution, for which the working class would seize the means of production and build a classless society where private property would be abolished and everyone would work for the common good. The Russian Revolution, which was originally based on these ideas, was to replace the old extractive Tsarist government with a more equal socialist one. However, the party that took control, the Bolsheviks, were not a broad coalition of the working and lower class like the Western revolutions, but rather a small group of highly radicalized and organized Marxists. Therefore, there was no built-in mechanism to stop them from becoming tyrannical themselves like there had been in the West. The first thing the Bolsheviks did was make themselves into a new class of political elites, much the same as the ones they had destroyed in the revolution. They disallowed anyone who disagreed with them from joining the party and sought to institute their socialist utopia through force. In 1918, during the Civil War, the first real display of the communist economy was put into place, called War Communism. All industries were nationalized and all economic processes were to be controlled by the state. Because of the desperate state of the economy, the Bolshevik Red Army was unable to get the weapons and food needed to win the war. Food and grain was seized from the rural peasants and all industry was allocated toward military manufacturing. By 1921, the new economic policy was instituted because war communism had dramatically reduced agricultural output and peasant public opinion. The NEP from 1921 to 1928 made agriculture and small businesses private again to stabilize food supply. The economy began to recover, but mostly as a result of rebuilding after complete collapse. In 1924, Lenin died of a stroke, and shortly after, Stalin took control as head of the Communist Party. In 1928, the first of the 5-year plans was set into motion, which nationalized all production once again. By this point, the entire Soviet economy was entirely commanded from above, meaning that every input and every output from every factory, every farm, every enterprise, every store, every price, all aspects of the Soviet economy was dictated by the government. Stalin and the innermost party officials in the Politburo would decide the general direction of the economy, then through a series of government agencies, an extremely intricate and detailed plan would be laid out. After a series of minor negotiations with managers of the individual farms and factories, the 5-year plan was put into law. The first major initiative of Stalin was to radically grow the heavy industry, which included steel and military manufacturing, in a desperate attempt to catch up economically to the other European powers. Stalin deeply feared that another war would come, and that being so behind in industrial development, the Soviet Union wouldn't be able to stand a chance. In an amazingly accurate and chilling speech given by Stalin at the First Workers' Conference in 1931, he stated, "We are 50 or 100 years behind the advanced countries. We must make up this gap in 10 years. Either we do this or they will crush us." It would be exactly 10 years later when the Germans launched the largest land invasion in history into the Soviet Union. The way in which this plan of rapid industrialization was to be carried out was to dramatically tax agriculture and ship massive amounts of food, labor, and supplies to the factories in the cities. In 1928, roughly 85% of the entire Soviet population was rural peasants whose backward, traditional way of doing things caused farming output to be very unproductive. Taxation of these small, scattered village communes was also notoriously inefficient. Stalin's way to deal with these problems was to force all the peasant farmers onto state-run or communal farms, which lumped hundreds or thousands together to work for the state. This process was known as collectivization, and it would directly lead to the deaths of approximately 12 million people. Almost all the food produced was shipped to the cities to aid in the main goal of industrializing the heavy industries. Taxation and the redistribution of food became easier. However, the inefficiencies were further exacerbated by the lack of incentives, since farmers' output had no bearing on how much they were paid. The agricultural sector continued to be a serious thorn in the Soviet economy for the rest of its history, and it highlights the first major problem with the Soviet economic system, that of incentives. In a capitalist society, you have total freedom to change your job and work anywhere else that will hire you. If you work smarter or harder or longer, you provide extra benefits to your employer. Not wanting to risk losing you to another employer, they will reward you with increased pay or benefits. Thus, there is a built-in incentive toward doing more of your job or better. In the communist Soviet Union, there was little if any incentive to do so, since your wage was almost always locked to a specific rate. Even when later attempts to provide more incentives were rolled out by the government, the extra money workers would receive would be of little use. Since the Soviet economy was dictated from above, to keep the population content, prices were fixed and kept low. Output and prices were therefore not correlated with one another like they are in capitalist societies. That meant that the need for goods at prices set was much greater than the actual production of those items. This meant that items were almost always out of stock, and when they weren't, they would quickly sell out. This, along with the fact that the heavy industry was persistently emphasized more than the consumer goods manufacturing, and what you're left with is the inability to make use of any of the extra money afforded to you for doing a better job. Thus, incentives in the Soviet Union did not function well, and per-person productivity suffered. Despite this, the economy kept on steaming ahead. Between the time period of Stalin's first 5-year plan in 1928 and the start of World War II, the Soviet economy grew by 5.8% per year, almost doubling in size during a time in which Western economies stagnated. This was done by forcing the allocation of people from less productive industries toward more productive ones. By utilizing the massive peasant population working in highly inefficient village farms and moving them to highly productive heavy industry and construction, massive gains in economic activity were accomplished. Even if workers themselves were not very productive, increased output could be accomplished simply by dramatically increasing inputs. How do you make more steel? You just make more steel factories and give each more iron and workers. The Soviet economy grew rapidly, however the quality of that growth was very poor. This is shown precisely by the actions of the enterprise managers, who are the ones that were actually managing the individual farms and factories. When a 5-year plan was being created, the last step included negotiations between heads of industry and the enterprise managers about how much input was needed for the planned output. Since the enterprise manager's only concern was to reach the planned output, they did not care about being cost effective and thus always asked for as many inputs as they could get away with. One way the Soviet planners tried to increase productivity was to demand more output this year than last year with the same amount of inputs. The way they incentivized managers to do this was by making managers pay based on meeting the target output and giving a bonus for going over. However, managers were smart and almost always the actual outputs were either directly above the target or much below. This was for one major reason. While the managers would receive a bonus for producing more, they were also concerned about next year's pay. By producing well over the target this year, the planners would just make that output the target for next year, making the ability to get next year's pay that much harder. So if the target was achievable, the manager would stop producing when they reached it, or if it was out of reach, there was no reason to work for nothing, so they produced as little as they could get away with, hoping next year's target would be lowered. Inputs for a factory also included the total number of employees. Supply chains were also notoriously unreliable and sporadic. This meant that for much of the time, there was way too many workers with little to no work to be done. However, when supplies came, the excess labor was needed to pull through quotas. Therefore, enterprise managers would ask for as many employees as possible, never wanting to fire any workers, and even if they did, it was often difficult to do so since jobs were legally guaranteed in the Soviet economy. This meant that the average factory in the Soviet Union would have as many as twice the amount of workers as a comparatively similar one in the United States. So while
they have like 1/10 the productivity. That's what fucking communism does, dude.
Unemployment was affected.
Damn, that chick has some beefy forearms. Holy fuck.
effectively zero, which is better than any capitalist society then and now, it was because of law and inefficiency rather than a byproduct of a more productive system. To make matters worse for productivity, when given new equipment that would eventually make the factory more productive, it would often end up going unused. This again was because of a lack of incentive by the enterprise managers to increase productivity. The enterprise manager would not profit off of this increased productivity, and he would personally risk not reaching target outputs this year since time would be needed to retrain and integrate the new equipment into the manufacturing line. Therefore, productivity gains were slow and stunted. Most of these incentive issues stemmed from another key issue, that of limited information. When planning out,
I'm gonna have a nap, and then I'll probably just end stream in a bit. I'm just fucking tired.
Your life was better when you had Jasmine. You're more USA back to the moon, baby. Pathetic Gozins only dig shitty tunnels and can't even get their daily caloric intake. Stupid Gozins. Suck it, losers. Enjoy living like shit.
Yeah, true. Just a bunch of vapes. Thanks for the donation, USA #1. Oh man. I am tired. Dodo donate $2. Did you see this? Okay, well, I can't watch that on YouTube. Somebody told me about that. Well, guess that's what happens when you're a jackass.
You did. What the?
Well, that's nice. Thanks for the donation, Dodo. Arc System Marks. Do they only make fighting games? Not sure if I can really invest in Guilty Gear at this point. Yeah. It's like all Guilty Gear. Forza Horizon 6 looks like it's going to be really fun.
While I was preparing to depart for Earth, the moonquake struck, damaging Edis.
Violence granted. We'll shut Edis down, and then we'll head to Earth.
Let's do our best. I decide my own way.
Life.
One-stop
That game looks really weird. Probably gonna try it, but looks weird. Fuck. Alright, I should probably get to bed. I have a bunch of gay shit that I have to do tomorrow. But I should be streaming tomorrow anyway, so I'll see you then. Big thanks to everybody who donated on Streamlabs. Appreciate it. I will try my best to be in a better mood. It's fucking hard, though. But thanks again. I'll see you all tomorrow.